Hello, parents of currently identified elementary GT learners in Coppell ISD. My name is Dina Dinas. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and advanced academics falls under my purview. So it's my pleasure to spend a little bit of time providing a voiceover for a presentation that I did twice the middle of September for GTi Curriculum Nights. Please note this is a voiceover, not nearly as interactive as it would be if we had all been able to be in the same room together. Any questions can be addressed to me. At the end of the presentation, I provide my contact information. During the presentation, we had leadership from the Coppell Gifted Association that spoke briefly about the opportunities that are available to learners and their families who are members. I would suggest that you go to their website, coppellgifted.org. There's the opportunity to join for $11 currently. I think that membership ends here pretty quickly. As I speak, today is September 25th. And also, we are looking for campus representatives, parents who can serve, if you will, as a conduit between the Coppell Gifted Association and the elementary campuses. If you are interested in serving in that capacity, please contact the GT specialist at your elementary learners campus. As any great educator does, I have some learning outcomes that I'd like to make sure are clear as we begin the presentation. First, I want to make sure that you that are listening to this have a learner who's currently being served in gifted and talented services in Coppell ISD. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our GT program audit that was conducted in the spring of 2013, the philosophy and assumptions that we operate under as we provide services to GT learners across the district, the parameters by which we function, and examples of some of the services that we provide at each campus. I'll also talk just briefly about the future service design, as this is an iterative process. The thing that ties all work together in the Coppell Independent School District is our call to action. We want to make sure that all of our learners are empowered with the knowledge and skills necessary to help them pursue their passions and to meaningfully contribute to the world around them. We also, in CISD, have a graduate profile or a portrait of a graduate, and you can see these 4 themes emerging through the services that we provide our GT learners. First, experiencing personal success. If you have more than one learner in your home, more than one child, you know that they are completely different despite the fact that they share the same DNA, come from the same home environments. You can imagine that success has to be individualized when you're talking about a classroom of 22, 24, 25 in the school district. We want to make sure that learners are lifelong learners themselves. It's important that those moving into the 21st century workplace understand that they're going to have to learn, unlearn, and relearn along the way, and we need to equip them with the tools to be able to do that. I don't think I need to speak much about how important it is to be an engaged citizen, but we do want to remind them that they aren't just a citizen locally, they are a citizen globally. And then to piggyback on that theme is that we want to make sure that learners are ready for the global workplace. Many of us in this room interact on a daily basis with people in other countries, and all evidence suggests that that trend will only continue and increase as we are moving into the 21st century. My own child is a learner in the school district, and it will be a graduate of the class of 2028, and it's very difficult for me to imagine what her life will be like when she enters the workplace, but I do know that she needs to be equipped to experience things and appreciate things from multiple perspectives. She needs to be able to take action. She needs to be able to communicate her ideas in a respectful fashion. So those are some of the things that we focus on, not just in GT services, but as a district as a whole. In the spring of 2013, the CISD GT program underwent a program evaluation. It was conducted by, at the time, our Director of Assessment, Research, and Accountability. We had administrators, classroom educators, district level personnel, parents, and community members that served on the evaluation team, and from that came 25 recommendations that were made to the Coppell Independent School District. 6 action teams were formed to address the themes that emerged out of those 25 recommendations, and throughout this presentation, items that are marked with the asterisk directly address recommendations from the program evaluation. I will tell you that of the 17 recommendations that were, of the 25 recommendations that were made, we have taken action on 17 of them. Some of them are in direct conflict with one another, and therefore we either went one way or another, but we won't ever reach all 25, as that would undo some of the work that's currently been done. I spoke a little bit about the philosophies and assumptions that we operate under as we're considering iterations of our gifted and talented services in Coppell ISD. I'll start with the number one driver for what we do is that gifted learners are a diverse group. Even though they all have the same label, if you will, and I'm not an advocate of labeling learners, but in this case, they are all identified gifted and talented. Those gifts and talents manifest themselves in very different ways. And as the people who are incredibly skilled and often great advocates for differentiation, if that is true, then we have got to serve our learners differently. We've got to differentiate the services to meet their particular learning needs. We've also got to provide a continuum of services in gifted education. In other words, there is no one size fits all. There's no, you're gifted, come with me, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have to differentiate what those services look like. And as the needs of the learners change, we're going to have to respond to those needs. We have to support our educators that have clusters of GT learners in their classrooms, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we continue to move through the presentation. And then we have to think about the individualization for gifted learners. They are very different, and we need to tap into what makes them unique as individuals. Some of the changes that we implemented right away were a change to our GT transfer policy. Prior to 2013, if you were identified GT in another school district or another state and you came to Coppell, you had to reassess in order to be served by GT services. There is good reason for that. There is no standardization of identification practices from district to district in the state of Texas, much less across the nation. However, we felt that we were losing time in assessing some learners who didn't need that. And so instead we decided to transfer learners in on a probationary status for 1 semester. And during that time we would gather data to decide whether the data suggested that GT services was an appropriate instructional placement for our learners. The only exception to that practice is for one particular local school that uses some different identification procedures. Those learners do have to reassess when they come into the Coppell Independent School District. We have provided extended summer learning opportunities, never in conflict with Mosaic, which is a summer program that the Coppell Gifted Association hosts twice during each summer, but we have expanded some of the services that we provide to include Camp Invention, which is run by one of our GT specialists, and this year we also had the co-director or the assistant director was one of our GT specialists, and that's an amazing opportunity for learners going into 2nd grade through the end of their elementary career. The district and campus improvement plans, these are required by law, do reflect the change in our GT services, so this is kind of an anchor, if you will, for all staff to continue to focus on the priority that providing this change of service in gifted and talented services. It doesn't go in a binder and then on a shelf. It's something that we're constantly working towards. And then the T-TEST Educator Evaluation System, which is the state system, includes a section on differentiated instruction. And our service model does support having that differentiated instruction piece, as well as providing some instructional supports for our campus educators being evaluated under that tool. I want to be really clear that our service model has never been a bad model. It's actually a quite strong one, but we did make some changes based on the program evaluation in 2013. Prior to that time, our elementary model consisted of cluster grouping learners in classrooms. We group GT learners based on a variety of factors, including social emotional needs, as well as friendships, partnerships, and their academic areas of strength. In classrooms in groups of 4 to 8. Now, please understand that's a guideline. It's certainly not the law. It varies a little bit from grade level to grade level and campus to campus. However, we do cluster learners in classrooms with educators who have had their 30 hours of GT training, or we'll get them, if they're a new educator to our district, we'll obtain those hours before the end of the first semester. And then coupled with that, again, prior to 2013, we had a pull-out service where the GT specialist would take the learners from the grade level or part of the grade level, depending on how many were identified at each grade level, for a enrichment opportunity for a maximum of about 3 hours per week. And there was nothing wrong with that model, and it's actually one that's used quite frequently around the state and around the nation. But it left us with a question, which was, what is happening for those GT learners the other 4.5 days? And we couldn't answer that question with any real concrete data. And so we started thinking about, well, how could we use the personnel we have and the resources that we have in order to better meet the needs and better serve the GT learners in the elementary classrooms? So we went back to our guiding purpose and the philosophy and assumptions that we have, and realized that we didn't have to serve all GT learners in exactly the same way. They aren't cookie cutters. They all are very unique and diverse. And so we redesigned our service model based on that philosophy. So here's our first step, and there's information about this on the Coppell ISD website, www.coppellisd.com. If you go to Gifted and Talented, you can learn more about our elementary services. But there is a federal mandate called Response to Intervention, which really deals with how you address the needs of struggling learners that would fall into this area right here. And so in the course of our conversations for redesign, we started talking about, well, is it possible that if there is a continuum of services you can provide for learners that are struggling, then is it not possible that there's a continuum of services that can be provided for learners who perhaps already know the grade level content when they come in, or master it very quickly once exposed to it? Here on the left side of the graphic, this is called RTI, Response to Intervention. On the other side of the graphic, we have talked about RTI also, but we call this Response to Instruction, and it turns out we aren't the only people that are thinking that way. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about our tiers of service now that you've got that background. Tier 1 belongs really to both models. Tier 1 is instruction that all learners are entitled to, and this is where we want learners to be at a minimum. This is good grade level instruction with some differentiation based on the strengths and interests of learners, but all learners should at least be at grade level, so this is grade level. And you don't have to be identified GT or have a learning difference in order to have Tier 1 instruction. But here at Tier 2, now we're talking about identification as a GT learner, and this is where we start cluster grouping learners into different classrooms with those educators that I previously mentioned have their 30 hours. And by the way, that is a requirement for all elementary classroom educators, so at some point they all have it, as it is highly likely that they'll have a cluster at some point within their first year or two here in the district. This is where our GT specialists, instead of pulling the learners out for that half day that I previously mentioned, now push into the classroom, and they work closely with the classroom educator to help design learning, not just for that half day that I previously mentioned, but for every day. Now, that's not every day in every content area because that's almost impossible to do, but this does mean that the GT specialist has provided indirect service to the GT learners who are cluster grouped at that Tier 2 level. Tier 3 is still a pull-out support. So these are learners who have a more intensive need to be differentiated for in the classroom. We would call this an accommodation, where we are either accelerating those learners to perhaps another grade level. We're certainly providing an extensive level of depth and complexity to the topics that are being discussed in the classroom. And we are perhaps providing some social emotional support. Those of you with gifted learners may have one at home who is a perfectionist. You may have one who has difficulty engaging their peers with conversation that is reciprocal, partially because GT learners, as we know, they develop asynchronously. In other words, their cognitive abilities sometimes go above their social emotional. And so this is where we can provide some support for our learners in this pull-out time. So this could be a small group. It could be multi-grade level based on an area of interest or a passion. It could be accelerated instruction. But the goal overall is that all students at all tiers should grow 1 year academically for every year they spend in school. And that seems to make a great deal of sense, at least to us. So for those of you that like to see it in words, this is the wordy version of what I just showed you on the graphic on the slide before. So I'll give you just a second to look at that. So again, we are breaking the mold in the services that we're providing. Approximately 28% of the Coppell Independent School District is identified gifted and talented at this point, and we feel like this is the most effective way for us to meet those needs in a way that really aligns with those philosophies and assumptions that we spoke of earlier. So our GT specialists are co-designing and co-facilitating learning with those cluster educators 5 days a week. Your learner may not see them all the time, as the GT specialists are often in planning times with classroom educators on their planning period, or providing through an electronic means a variety of extensions and pre-assessments. But please understand that less face time doesn't actually mean less service. It's actually the opposite of that. The services we provide are also, again, somewhat fluid. I mentioned this earlier. Learners don't live at Tier 1 or Tier 2. It just means that the services we are providing based on the need the learner is exhibiting kind of falls into those categories, and that helps us better design for the needs of the learners. Those are fluid, and learners move back and forth based on content area, based on interest, strengths, sometimes external factors that are influencing how they're performing during the school year. And then our service design helps us provide the service within several different learning design models. Currently, all foundational curriculum, meaning grade level curriculum, is written in the school district using UBD, which is Understanding by Design. It's just a backwards planning model that says, what is it that we want learners to know and be able to do, and then we design backwards from there to help them learn that. So it's beginning with the end in mind. But on almost every campus, we have other instructional initiatives that you can then lay on top of that UBD. So there's project-based learning, there's STEM, where we have an elementary focus, a whole campus that really focuses on STEM. And then we have the IB frameworks that are part of our International Baccalaureate Elementary School, Pinkerton Elementary. All of those things function quite well inside of the UBD framework. As our GT specialists are co-designing and co-facilitating with classroom educators, they're keeping in mind the following parameters. Learning design needs to focus on our learners' areas of academic strength. In other words, we need to grow them in their areas of strength. But we also have to look at the areas that they have that they need to grow in. We have many perfectionists. It is a trait of GT learners that many of them are perfectionists and are unwilling to even try if they think that they may fail. So we've got to work with our GT learners to address that area of growth, to develop, if you will, a little bit of grit, learning how to fail forward and reflect on that and then move forward. So we're not just focused on their areas of strength, but also those opportunities for growth for them. We want to address their areas of interest. Many GT learners have a passion, just something that completely consumes them and they want to pursue. And as we can, we want to wrap that into their learning opportunities in the school. Dinosaurs, for example, is not in the curriculum at any grade level. However, we all know how fascinating that is for many of our learners. And so if we can figure out how to tie their passions in with the curriculum, we're going to attempt to do so. Can't always make it work, but we certainly want to acknowledge that that area of passion exists and where appropriate, integrate it into the learning that's happening in the classroom and make connections to it. And then I've already mentioned that we want to target 1 year's worth of growth for 1 year's worth of instruction. If you're going to sit there for a year, we feel like you should learn something. And then the other piece that we are focused on as learning design is happening is embedding those future-ready skills. The utilization of technology. Many of our GT facilitators have set up Schoology courses for our learners to access. They have portfolios or Google Docs that they're working through. We want them to understand that technology is both a tool for play as well as a tool for learning, and how to appropriately do that. And that's a challenge for all of us as we're in this digital world, kind of navigating, if you will, for the first time, how to help learners make responsible choices, good choices, as they are searching for information on the internet. And then we want to help them monitor their time and effort. I'll refer back to that area of interest. Many of you may have a learner at home that often goes down rabbit holes and won't come up forever unless there's a little bit of monitoring of progress. And so helping learners self-regulate a bit and learn those important skills of this is the now that has to be accomplished, and here are the things that I will come back to. Those are things that we are focusing on. And then providing time for reflection, not just in the CISD, but I think educators as a whole, we struggle with providing that time for learners to reflect on what did I just learn? What are the most important pieces of that? How does that connect to my own personal goals? How does it connect to the next area of study that I'm going to move into? And helping them kind of capture that information, slowing down just long enough to really think about our own thinking before moving on to the next experience. We always seem to be on the go. There's always more pressure and more things to do, more to cover. And so that's something that we are working on collectively to really slow it down and learn from our own learning. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are not done. Where are we going? Well, these are obviously very individual cookies, and we are moving towards more customized services for our learners. So I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. During the 2017-2018 school year, we're going to be piloting individualized learning plans for third grade learners. We chose third grade for a couple of reasons. One, it's a universal screening year, and so we will be onboarding some additionally identified learners moving into the spring. It also is this interesting time from a developmental standpoint where learners really move into an abstract level of thinking. They are able to predict more, goal set a little bit further. So this is the grade level we'll be focusing on this year as we begin piloting individualized plans across the district. The GT specialists and I are going to be doing some work around that on October 6th with our Professional Learning Day, really nailing down the specifics for that rollout as we move into the spring. We'll be goal setting with learners in academic and social emotional areas. It can't just be about the academics, but it does have to be about that whole child. What are some more personal, if you will, goals, not just academic goals that you want to achieve over the course of the year. We've got to help increase through that process their ownership of differentiated opportunities. As I stated earlier, the GT specialists are designing with classroom educators, and it's certainly appropriate from time to time for a learner to say, you know what, I really don't want that particular extended learning opportunity or the depth and complexity that comes in this particular topic. I'd like to sit back and just read. That is really what I want to do right now. And that's okay every once in a while, but we also have to push them to use their talents and to learn to that to the highest level, to experience that personal success that we talked about earlier. And if they're capable, then we need to be working with them on that. So part of that goal setting will be to help create that ownership of those differentiated opportunities. And then it is our intention to support and follow up on those goals throughout not just this academic year, but potentially from year to year, perhaps with a refinement process as learners move into the 4th and 5th grades. Since many of you have already attended the curriculum nights for your learners across the district at the elementary level, you may have heard that we have a new curriculum that's been rolled out across the CISD. It was written by our CISD educators using that Understanding by Design format, or that UBD format that I discussed earlier. And as always, there's no separate curriculum for GT. Instead, we build upon the curriculum or extend the curriculum that's being offered in the general education classroom. There are a couple of things that are really exciting about this for our GT specialists. For the first time ever, we have a scope and sequence. In other words, the amount of curriculum that is to be covered and in the time frame in which it is to be covered is standardized across the district. So now when we meet together once a month, we're able to better leverage the areas of expertise of our GT specialists, some things that they are capable of doing and can now do with great confidence that it can be used at all 10 campuses at roughly the same time, creating pre-assessments so that learners can opt out, if you will, from curriculum that they already know. We can begin extending for them right away where appropriate. We can also create extensions that can be utilized across the district, and we can coordinate those extensions and accelerations where appropriate from campus to campus, utilizing the strengths of our specialists. We have never been able to do this before, and it's really exciting to see the doors opening up for us in terms of leveraging our collective expertise. As you can imagine, it's important for us to build capacity across the school district to meet the needs of the almost 1/3 of the district that's identified gifted and talented. Since implementing the changes to our program evaluation, 700 or so CISD classroom educators have enrolled in the CISD 30-hour GT training. It is specific to us, and we were able to build that in an online fashion. 4 of the modules are online, and then the 5th is face-to-face, where they have the opportunity to really discuss what this means for their learning design, and that's pretty exciting. That 700 number, with only 1,200 educators working in the district total, that's quite significant, and we're pretty excited about that. All of our CISD assistant principals, with the exception of the new ones, have completed an administrator-specific 6-hour GT training. That's to make sure that they understand the social emotional needs of gifted learners as well as the academic needs so that we can better serve them. They're often a part of conversations as class lists are being constructed, as instructional decisions are being made with master schedules at the secondary level, and sometimes in discipline issues where maybe a very precocious GT learner took a risk and may require some disciplinary action. So we want to make sure that they have some understanding of the nature and needs of our GT learners. Elementary principals have participated in training around clustering and the importance of and the why behind cluster grouping our GT learners, and that it is part of our program model. And then I can't say enough about the support that we continue to receive from our Coppell Gifted Association. Every year they provide scholarships for administrators, district level personnel, including our previous superintendent who has attended the Texas Association for Gifted and Talented, and for classroom educators to attend the annual conference. It makes me quite proud year after year when we show up, and we really are the Coppell Nation, someplace between 20 and sometimes as many as 60 of us, depending on where the conference is held attend, and a lot of that is due to the support that we receive from the Coppell Gifted Association. Some other pieces to building capacity. We have guidelines for professional learning around gifted and talented so that it's in line with, again, those parameters, our philosophies and assumptions. There are a dozen 6-hour updates that have been created in-house. We will continue to revise those as the needs of our educators continue to evolve around their understanding of the nature and needs and academic needs of gifted learners. And then the 6-hour updates are approved at the district level, and that's been a practice that has been ongoing for quite some time. In other words, you can't submit just anything for GT update hours. There are some particular specifications and requirements for those hours. Work that is ongoing, transition to middle school. We now have all 5th grade learners taking the COGAT. There's a reason for that. We didn't used to universally screen at 5th grade, but we do want our 5th graders, all 5th graders, whether identified GT or not, to have a data point they can look at beyond STAR that gives us information as to their areas of greatest academic strengths. This will, for this year, in 2018, start driving the conversation behind which GT courses identified GT learners can take when they get to middle school. In other words, if I'm identified language arts, social studies, those are the GT classes I should take. If I am identified math, science, those are the GT classes I should take. My other classes would be honors. If I am identified general intellectual ability, then of course all of them are open for me, but we want our learners to take courses that are aligned with their areas of strength. And we do provide an opportunity for middle school and elementary school counselors to work together to support the transition of GT learners from 5th to 6th grade. So how do we know if it's working? Well, we don't have a great deal of data points beyond the state assessment STAR, and I'll be the first person to say that it is not my favorite metric, particularly when we are talking about advanced learners, because it has a ceiling. It tests what we should have taught you and you should have mastered in a particular grade level. But I do want to bring your attention to some interesting data that I've gathered over the last couple of years. Since 2013, you can see that in all content areas, our advanced performance, that means really getting all but maybe one question right on these state assessments from 3rd through 5th grade, has continued to rise, and I think that that's not a coincidence. So that does give us some information. Again, this test still has a ceiling, and there is a phenomenon that happens with the standardized test that's been utilized for some time, where all of those measures do go up. But I still believe there's not a coincidence that these continue to go up since the time of our service model changing. That's one metric, and I'm going to show you something that's even more interesting on the next slides. Again, still using STAR data, one of our new data specialists in the district, Dr. Pooja Shivraj, put together some data for us for reading and math grades 4 and 5 to let us know how our GT learners were doing compared to non-GT learners. And through her statistical practice of matching, she was able to control for all variables. The only thing that is different in these learner groups is whether they are identified or not. And as you can see, the GT learner on the purple line is trending up, meaning there is growth for that learner when matched to their non-GT identified peer, but there's also growth in that learner, which is pretty exciting for us, which means that both groups are growing, and it kind of goes to our philosophy of a rising tide lifts all ships. I'm going to show you some additional data on the next 3 slides. In math grade 4, both groups are also growing. However, what I want to point out is that while the lines do cross, that means that the GT learners, as there was a significant gap here on the left-hand side, They already started much higher. There was less room for them to grow. But over the course of the year, both groups did continue to trend up. So that tells us there's growth for both groups. See a similar phenomenon in reading grade 5. Again, both groups are growing. The lines do cross again, which tells us that not only do the GT learners benefit from our instructional service model, but so do the non-GT peers. And then finally, a data point from math grade 5 and the growth that is occurring for both groups. What I also find exciting and significant, and in all honesty makes me proud, is that across the district there was no variance from one campus to another. And given the fact that the GT specialists have just one day a month to plan together, if everyone wasn't pulling their weight, this data would be skewed in one form or another. But across all campuses, there was no variance in the amount of growth from our GT learners, which is a pretty exciting thing and makes me proud to work with the ladies that I work with. I mentioned earlier that this is an iterative process. We're not done by any means designing learning and redesigning learning for our GT learners. Currently, we are, as a GT specialist group, reading a book written by one of our former Coppell ISD educators called Grit in the Classroom, and this is specifically designed to help us look at helping our GT learners fail forward, to learn how to persist when things become difficult, to develop that character trait of grit. And we are doing a book study on that right now, and then the author is coming in to speak with us on October 6th and help us action plan around creating cultures of grittiness on our elementary campus. We believe that that will behoove us and serve us well moving into the future. We also continue to look at our identification procedures for learners who come from special learning populations, particularly our English language learners, or ELLs, those that are in our dual language immersion programs. We also have some learner groups that are underrepresented. The ideal would be that learners served through the GT services and CISD mirrored the population of the school district, and that's just not the case. So we consider the techniques by which we are identifying gifted learners, as we believe that brilliance is sprinkled liberally across all learner groups. If that's the case, then we need to continue to tweak our identification procedures to actively seek out the giftedness that we are currently missing. And then we continue to look for measures beyond STAR performance. Again, that test has a ceiling. There is a growth measure that we have used previously, and we are hopeful to be able to reintegrate that into our school district as a whole in the near future. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation that has to occur beyond the GT specialists in bringing that measure back. As I wind down this presentation, there are a couple of big ideas I want to make sure you walk away with. The first one is that we don't call our GT program a program. We talk about a continuum of services that we have that respond to the needs of learners. A program, in our experience, really sounds like a club or something you keep applying to until you get in. What we provide is a service based on an identified need, and when that need changes, our service responds to that. Less face time with the GT specialist doesn't mean less service. It is less face time than in our previous model, and that has caused some concern in the past, but it actually means that our learners are currently receiving more service as the GT specialists are co-designing with those classroom educators. And then finally, we're not done. We will continue to innovate. We like our service model at this point, but there are some things we need to continue to tweak. The foundational curriculum being put in place opens up a whole bunch of doors to us where we can use our collective capacity in ways we've not been able to do in the past. So we will continue to iterate on the model that we currently provide. Questions and comments can be addressed to me, Dina Dinas, at capellisd.com, ddinas at capellisd.com, or you can follow my Twitter at capelgifteded. I would also encourage you to follow your GT specialists at all campuses. I try to retweet what they're tweeting out, but they're really showing great examples of services that are being provided. Any questions and comments can come to me, and thank you for your attention. I know it's been a long presentation.